From the First World War to the modern day, fighter aircraft have dominated the battlefield from the skies. And within a century, aviation technology has evolved from wooden biplanes to supersonic stealth jets. Now, Top 10 will test, assess, and grade the most feared fighter aircraft in military history. Over the past century, dozens of aircraft have been designed and built to fight in the sky. But now, based on expert opinion, audience polls, and technical comparison, we've constructed a 5-point matrix that will rank the top 10 fighter aircraft of all time. When no one could predict the end of the Cold War, U.S. military brass ordered a replacement fighter for its impressive F-15s and F-16s, one capable of defeating any Soviet-built fighter. $20 years and $37 billion later, this aircraft edges into our list at number 10.
The FA-22 Raptor. Manufacturer Lockheed Martin. Power plant Pratt & Whitney F119 PW100. Top speed Mach 2.5. Armament 1 20mm cannon. 6 ARMRAAM and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles.
Despite its eye-watering cost, each aircraft coming in at a massive $200 million, the aircraft is predicted to be the deadliest fighter ever produced.
In some ideal world in which there are no other spending priorities for armed forces, maybe you'd buy the F-22 just on aesthetic grounds. It's a work of art. It's beautiful.
But the Raptor's killer looks are backed up with deadly capabilities. In testing against F-15s, the F-22's first look, first shot, first kill design has given its pilots unrivaled air combat performance.
It's going out there and taking F-15s in unprecedented numbers like 2 versus 8, 2 versus 10, 2 versus 12, and as many as 16, and cleaning clock.
Able to fire missiles in tight turns and rolls, the Raptor looks like a lethal fighting machine. But why isn't it at the top of our list of top 10 fighters of all time?
When you design an airplane to carry stealth, to carry this kind of radar, that kind of missile and so on, without an overarching mission, you come up with a turkey.
The F-22 goes faster than you need to go. It is stealthier than it needs to be. And it's bigger than it has to be. It carries all the weapons inside, which is very important if you like a tidy appearance. But in the real world, when you've got aircraft that are good enough, like the F-15 and the F-16, why are you wasting money, piles of money, on the F-22 when you could be making newer, better F-15s or F-16s?
The answer, of course, is because technology has to continue to develop.
Because it is almost invisible to radar and carries an awesome array of weaponry, the F-22 Raptor, America's 4th-generation fighter, gets superb innovation and fear factor ratings. But the aircraft is severely let down by its astronomical production cost and the fact it has some way to go to match the combat records of the F-15s and 16s. And so, in the kill ratio, production, and service length categories, the Raptor scores nothing, placing it firmly in 10th place on our list. Born out of the Cold War fear that NATO air bases would be annihilated in any first-wave strike by the USSR, this aircraft was designed with unique capabilities. Able to take off and land almost anywhere, this distinctive jet leapfrogs the Raptor into 9th place, literally.
The Sea Harrier FA-2. Manufacturer British Aerospace. Power plant, 1 Rolls-Royce Pegasus Mark 106 turbofan. Top speed, 736 miles per hour. Armament, 2 30mm Aden cannon plus 2 ARMRAAM and 4 Sidewinder missiles. 2 Harpoon or Sea Eagle anti-ship missiles.
The British Harrier is a very romantic aircraft. It moves up, it moves down, it twists around. It catches and holds your imagination because it does things that, in your mind, an aircraft ought to be able to do.
But the Harrier's success is anything but imaginary.
For a 5-year period at the end of the 90s and into the 21st century, provided Europe with the very best fighter aircraft available in terms of look-down, shoot-down, in terms of all-weather capability. Nothing came close to it.
The Harrier is the world's only vertical takeoff and landing jet fighter. Powered by a single engine, its vertical lift is created by channeling the engine exhaust downwards through 4 nozzles. This unique capability proved decisive in 1982. With only small aircraft carriers at its disposal, the Harrier was the only fighter capable of defending the British task force sent to liberate the Falkland Islands.
There's no doubt at all that the Harrier was a war-winning factor in the Falklands campaign. It certainly limited the capability of the Argentine Air Force and Naval Air Arm to push home attacks on the beachheads there. Remember that the British forces were outnumbered 10 to 1. Remember they were operating some 8,000 kilometers from home.
The only thing about the Harrier that puts it on the list is British pilots. RAF has always had really fine pilots. In the Falklands, the pilots were lopsidedly better. The Argentinians didn't even know enough to turn when they were under attack.
Nicknamed La Muerta Negra, or Black Death, by Argentine pilots, the charcoal-painted Sea Harrier scored 23 confirmed kills for no combat loss, accounting for almost 80% of Argentine air losses in the conflict. Not bad for a subsonic fighter. But the Harrier does have its problems.
It has very tiny wings, and necessarily so, in order to be able to fly vertically, to take off vertically. That's such a heavy burden on an airplane. You cannot make a good fighter that takes off vertically, because you've paid such a weight penalty and you've had to shrink the wings so much to get that capability that you're out of the fighter business.
It's not that stealthy. It's not that quick. It isn't that capable in terms of carrying a large weapon load, but it is a proven fighting machine.
In fact, so effective is the Harrier that the U.S. Marine Corps adopted it, and they still use the AV-8B Harrier II today.
The American version of Harrier is made to look a lot sharper and sexier than the British version. And it's almost as though the American designers said, well, we'll get that one for the Marine Corps, but you gotta put a longer beak on it and a big pointy bit on the front.
With its unrivaled ability to maneuver, hover, and pop up from unexpected places, the Harrier earns a solid fear factor rating. Its unique design and simple-to-produce airframe score well. Despite achieving a high kill ratio in the Falklands, the jump jet's slow speed makes it vulnerable to ground fire, which reduces its overall score. As the aircraft is phased out of frontline operations, it still earns a respectable 9th place in our top 10 league. In 8th place is the oldest machine on our list, and one that sums up what fighters are all about, the dogfight.
Once you got it down, it became a lethal killing machine, and that's what flying fighters is about, to be the most lethal guy in the sky.
Making a name for itself by being the fighter that brought down the Red Baron, This airplane set the benchmark against which all future fighters would be judged.
The Sopwith Camel. Manufacturer, the Sopwith Aviation Company. Power plant, Clerget rotary engine. Maximum speed, 112 miles per hour. Armament, 2 Vickers .303 caliber machine guns.
The First World War saw the birth of the airplane as a military weapon. In a period of just a few short years, military aircraft evolved from basic flying contraptions to become killing machines, and in the process, revolutionized warfare. The best and most recognizable of these designs was the legendary Sopwith Camel.
In its day, it also had the look. I mean, it looks like a fighter. I mean, it was a clean, nice design. It looked strong and beefy and powerful, and I think it flew that way.
But the Camel's beefy engine is the single heaviest component of the aircraft. The fuselage was constructed by stretching canvas around a wooden and wire frame, making the Camel surprisingly small and lightweight. Nevertheless, it represented the state-of-the-art in fighter design at the time.
The Sopwith Camel, to me, is the outstanding aircraft of World War I. Not only because it was built in such numbers, not only because it was flown by so many of the aces, but also in the way in which it prosecuted the war. It was a feared aircraft.
The Camel gained its unusual name from the humped cowling over the breeches of the 2 Vickers machine guns, which were synchronized to fire through the propeller, a design feature that became standard on British fighters for nearly 20 years.
Every way you look about the Camel, it has excellence, except for one thing. It's a very difficult aeroplane to fly.
Because the cylinders of its air-cooled engine rotated around the aircraft's axis, the Camel was inherently unstable.
The torque of that big Clerget rotary engine is such that no matter what you're doing, it's always twisting around and trying to turn laterally in the sky and throw itself into an unrecoverable flat spin. Flying a Sopwith Camel is like being on a bucking bronco. It's always trying to get out of your control. And that means if you can just hold on and make it do your will, it is tremendously maneuverable.
But the price of maneuverability was high. The plane's wood and fabric construction and poorly protected fuel tank made the Camel susceptible to fire. In fact, the average life expectancy of a Camel pilot in World War I was little more than 2 weeks.
There are almost as many Sopwith Camel pilots killed by the plane as there are killed by the enemy. It's very dangerous, but if you can make it work for you, it's very effective.
So effective that it went on to become the mainstay of the Royal Flying Corps in the last 2 years of the war, fighting all along the Western Front.
The Camel's decisive in terms of when it came into service. It came into service just at the time when the Allies were being pushed back. The Germans had air supremacy over the trenches, and it reversed it. And it did more than that. It really did drive fear into the hearts of German aviators.
Credited with destroying at least 1,200 enemy aircraft, the Sopwith Camel rightly deserves to be called one of the best fighters of all time. Its solid, if unspectacular, scoring across the board ensures its 8th place in the list of the greatest fighters of all time. Moving from one world war to the next, to an aircraft that marks the beginning of the end for propeller-powered fighters. Representing a quantum leap in aircraft design, few fighters can have had as much impact on aerial warfare as the one the Matrix has placed 7th in our list.
The ME-262. Manufacturer, Messerschmitt. Power plant, 2 Junkers Jumo 004s. Top speed 540 miles per hour. Armament, 4 30mm Mark 108 cannons.
Certainly the most advanced aircraft of its time, the ME-262's mold-breaking design changed the face of modern aerial warfare.
If you just look at it, it's an epoch-making aeroplane. It is the first operational jet fighter. It is an aircraft of exceptional performance on paper. There's no doubt in my mind that the ME-262 should have been a war winner.
Flying at speeds of up to 540 miles per hour, the aircraft, nicknamed the Swallow, was faster than the North American P-51 Mustang by a staggering 125 miles per hour.
The ME-262 took the performance to another 30 to 40% more than the best piston fighters of the era, both in altitude, climb rate, speed, the whole thing.
But the 262 has to be in our list because it is the world's first operational jet fighter, and because it did frighten the life out of the American bomber crews when they saw it. And I have to say, it also out of the fighter crews as well, who had no idea how they were going to combat this propellerless aeroplane as it was first described.
It was very frightening because everybody knew you weren't going to see all of them. And the one you didn't see was the one that was going to shoot you down.
Luckily for the Allies, only a relatively small number of the aircraft, 1,443, were ever produced. Of that, it is estimated that only about 300 ever saw combat, the others being destroyed in training accidents or Allied attacks. Almost impossible to defeat at altitude, the 262 did have an Achilles heel. It was vulnerable on takeoff and landing, and this weakness helps keep the aircraft down on our list. For innovation, the Swallow scores maximum points. As the first of its kind, it inspired equal measures of fear and admiration, so it also scores off the scale in the fear factor category. But because the aircraft was difficult to build and it had notoriously unreliable engines, the aircraft's production rating is low. So too is its service record, having only been active for a little over 2 years. Nevertheless, the ME-262 will forever be in the record books as being the world's first fully operational jet fighter, a legend of the skies, the 7th greatest fighter of all time. Coming up, an aircraft that possessed all the grace of a ballerina, yet packed a powerful punch.
It is the most beautiful looking fighter airplane ever. If I was only allowed to have one airplane hanging on from the ceiling of my bedroom as a little boy, it would have been the Spitfire.
The Supermarine Spitfire. Manufacturer Supermarine Aviation Works. Power plant, one Rolls-Royce Merlin V12 piston engine. Top speed 369 miles per hour. Armament 8 Browning 303 machine guns. Later version 4 20mm cannon.
The Supermarine Spitfire remains one of the classic fighter aircraft of all time. Its unique shape and the unmistakable sound of its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine will forever be a symbol of British defiance during the Battle of Britain in the summer 1940.
The Battle of Britain is perhaps the classic example of the Spitfire mystique. There's no doubt that Britain would have lost the Battle of Britain without the Spitfire, but the Spitfire didn't win the Battle of Britain.
During the battle, the RAF Spitfire shot down fewer aircraft than Britain's other frontline fighter, the Hawker Hurricane. Nevertheless, it earned a formidable kill ratio and legendary reputation.
Spitfire is an elegant airplane, and it has beautiful lines, and it flies like it has beautiful lines.
Powered by arguably the best aero engine of the Second World War, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Spitfire had tremendous performance. The Spitfire remained in production for 12 years, and when manufacturing ceased in 1948, more than 22,000 aircraft had been built. If good looks were one of the rating categories in our matrix, then the Spitfire would be at the top of our list.
Without doubt, the Spitfire is the most beautiful aeroplane that's ever flown. Without doubt, it is the icon of the fighter. But it isn't quite perfection. It is not the greatest fighter aircraft of all time.
Marked down for its difficult production and maintenance schedules, the Spitfire's kill ratio, length of service, and fear factor ratings edge the famous aircraft into a solid 6th place. Truly the best of British. The Matrix can't separate them. And so in joint 4th place, an aircraft that became a legend in Soviet air power.
You can't have a top 10 without paying homage to the Russian designers, particularly to the MiG-Ayan Bureau.
The MiG-15. Manufacturer, the Mikoyan Gurevich Design Bureau. Power plant, 1 Klimov VK-1 turbojet. Top speed 668 miles per hour. Armament, 1 37mm cannon. 2 23mm cannon.
After the Second World War, on both sides of the Iron Curtain, Soviet and American aircraft designers came up with fighter designs that incorporated jet technology pioneered by the Me-262. The Soviets used a combination of Russian ingenuity and borrowed advanced European aviation technology to create one of the most feared aircraft of its era. Built under a cloak of secrecy, the MiG-15's 35-degree swept wing, fuselage-mounted engine, and clean lines gave the aircraft exceptional performance. And when communist North Korea invaded the South in June 1950, the Soviet-built MiG entered combat for the first time and came as a massive shock to the American Air Force.
The United States routinely underestimates the technological capability of the Soviet Union, and American propaganda during the early Cold War finds it necessary to characterize the Soviets as individually pretty dim, if fiendish, but also to characterize Soviet industry as inherently inferior.
But there was nothing inferior about this aircraft. Its speed, maneuverability, and heavy armament allowed it to brush aside escorting fighters and rip through American B-29 formations.
I think without doubt in fear factor terms, for a short period there over North Korea, the Americans were petrified of a jet they didn't know existed.
Losses to MiGs reached such high levels that the U.S. Air Force was forced to stop daylight bombing raids and flew all future strikes under the cover of darkness. America needed to stop the MiGs, and fast. Desperate to gain an equal footing in the skies above the 38th parallel, America deployed the jet that shares joint position with the MiG in 4th place.
The F-86 Sabre. Manufacturer, North American. Power plant, 1 General Electric J47 engine. Top speed, 685 miles per hour. Armament, 6 50 caliber machine guns and 8 5-inch rockets.
I've flown all the modern fighters. I've flown a lot of the headline World War II fighters, but I've never been in one that is just so natural and so well balanced and so well behaved. It has no dark corners.
F-86 is a very happy accident. The people who designed it gave it a lot of wing surface, in part because they wanted it to be able to climb very quickly. As a result, even though they didn't think it was going to be a dogfighter, they didn't think that the F-86 needed to be very maneuverable, just by chance, it had so much wing on it that it became a truly excellent dogfighter.
Flown by experienced World War II veterans, the F-86 made an immediate impact, shooting down almost 800 MiGs for the loss of only 78 Sabres.
The Americans achieved a very high kill ratio, 10 to 1, for very simple reasons. The quality of the American pilots was outstanding.
People say in general that the MiG-15 was a better airplane than the F-86 and that pilots made the difference. The second part of the statement is absolutely true. But when it comes to airplane comparisons, the F-86 is a vastly better fighter. The MiG-15 would have been totally unacceptable in American hands. If you had tried to give that to American pilots, they would have said, this is a turkey, get rid of this thing.
If I had to choose between the MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre, there's one clear factor that would separate them. The Sabre looks better. It looks like a fighter, whereas the MiG looks like a tractor.
Compared to today's fighters, both these jets are underpowered and primitive. But few aircraft have done so well at the job they were designed to do. Both the F-86 Sabre and the MiG-15 were the right aircraft at the right time. And each richly deserve a prominent place in aviation history. So, checking in with the Matrix, we can see that the MiG-15 outscores the Sabre in the fear factor category. But the F-86 bounces back with a far superior kill ratio, outscoring the MiG by an impressive 10 to 1. Both designs relied heavily on captured German swept-wing technology and British engine design. So for innovation, the MiG and Sabre are equally matched. Both fighters were produced in large numbers, but the MiG edges in front in the production category because of its renowned simplicity, and both these legendary jets have similar service records. The result? They are inseparable. The MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre tie for 4th place. Next, in 3rd place on the list of top 10 fighters of all time, an aircraft with an enviable service record and a hard-hitting reputation. The first fighter to incorporate titanium in its construction, this jet set 15 aviation world records in the first 18 months of operation.
The F-4 Phantom. Manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas. Power plant, 2 J79 Spey turbojet afterburning engines. Top speed, 1,485 miles per hour. Armament, 4 AIM-7 Sparrow and 4 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles.
The Phantom rates as one of the most successful warplanes of all time, certainly one of the most successful post-war fighters. And it has the distinction of being the second most prolific American jet fighter to be built, outnumbered only by the North American Sabre. The Phantom was the first multi-service aircraft, flying concurrently with the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps.
The Phantom is a rock-solid performing fighter aircraft. It has all the right characteristics. It has the capability to defeat most of the known adversaries then, not today, but in the prime of its service life. It has the capability of being developed. Reconnaissance, suppression of enemy air defenses, a bomber version. It has all of that, it has the flexibility. Easy enough to fly, easy enough to support, relatively easy to manufacture.
In continuous production for 20 years, from 1959 until 1979. At the height of its manufacture during the Vietnam War, 72 Phantoms were rolling out of the factory every month. But it does have its critics.
American Air Force pilots in the Vietnam era said that there was nothing to lose if you fly it sideways instead of flying it frontwards because it was so horrible in its aerodynamic capabilities.
Every peculiar bend you see in that airplane, you know, the wings go down like this and the tail goes down like that. Those are all aerodynamic band-aids for bad handling and misdesign. It's a big kludge. It's a bad handling airplane. The only thing it had was fairly big engines.
It had two big fat engines. It was too heavy. The wing was not big enough for its weight. The Phantom was a very big, very fast bus.
If you have a nice bus and you have big enough engines, it'll kick the ass out of anything. So it could really go fast. And it was really the first airplane that came out and took the next step in the weapons capability.
Built without a gun, the Phantom relied entirely on new missile technology. But these first-generation air-to-air missiles were unreliable, and the Phantom's early experiences in the Vietnam War were unimpressive.
It was the airplane that achieved for us a disgraceful exchange ratio in Vietnam. I mean, for a good part of the war, we were only getting 1-to-1 exchange ratio against pilots of much less sophistication than us, against a MiG-21 that's a very badly flawed airplane.
I think the airplane got a little raw reputation in the beginning, not because of its overall capability, just because of the tactics being utilized. Once those tactics were altered, then it wound up getting right back up there and having a substantial kill ratio advantage.
After its early harsh lessons in Vietnam, Phantom IIs went on to notch up an impressive 277 air-to-air combat victories. From 1958 until its U.S. service retirement in 1996, F-4 Phantoms have flown more than 17 million miles. The equivalent of one aircraft flying continuously for more than 2,000 years.
For nearly half the time that man has been able to make powered flight, the Phantom's been in squadron service. It's still there today. That alone is a good enough testament.
Produced in large numbers, the F-4 Phantom has an unrivaled service history. But the aircraft really earns its third place for being fast, durable, and deadly. Phantoms were the testbed for missile technology, and the aircraft held 5 speed records for an impressive 13 years before being beaten by the aircraft featured next in our list of the top 10 fighters of all time. If it's air superiority you want and can afford its hefty price tag, this is the aircraft of choice.
The F-15C Eagle. Manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas. Power plant, 2 Pratt & Whitney F100 PW100 afterburning turbofans. Top speed, Mach 2.5. Armament, 1 20mm cannon. 4 AIM-7F Sparrow and 4 AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles.
In the mid-1960s, the U.S. Air Force decided to acquire a new air superiority fighter and came up with the F-15 Eagle.
The term air superiority fighter was almost invented for F-15. The F-15 is the opposite of the Phantom. It's not made to go as fast as possible. It's made to go fast enough. The F-15 is designed to do a task, achieve air superiority. It's designed to be a dogfighter.
That was the first airplane in U.S. history ever designed for maneuverability. Think about that. From World War I through 1968, no airplane in U.S. history had ever been designed to maneuver. Always higher, further, faster.
The F-15 is beautiful not because of its shape. It's beautiful not because nothing can go faster. It's beautiful not because nothing can go higher. F-15 is beautiful because it's the best solution to the job that needs to be done. F-15 is a mission-oriented aircraft.
Its mission, to sweep enemy fighters out of the sky, is one that it performs peerlessly. F-15s went into action for the first time during March 1978 with the Israeli Air Force, flying top cover for ground operation in southern Lebanon. 5 Syrian MiG-21s were downed in the Eagle's first engagement worldwide. And on the opening night of Operation Desert Storm, F-15s shot down 38 enemy aircraft. The F-15's combat record is exemplary. Since 1978, an active force of just 396 aircraft have shot down 104 enemy aircraft for no losses. No other fighter in the history of aerial combat has a record that even comes close.
The F-15 is way better than the F-4, which was a terrible turkey. Accelerates better, turns better, handles better.
In fact, such is the reputation of the F-15 that during the opening phase of Iraqi freedom, Saddam Hussein's Air Force simply refused to get in the air. They knew the F-15 would just knock them out of the sky. Its now legendary reputation as a killer sees it scoring top points in both fear factor and kill ratio categories. Its high-tech weapons system earns significant innovation points, as does the fact it will remain in the frontline service for the USAF until at least 2028. Let down by its sky-high cost, the Eagle just fails to make it to the top spot on our list of the best fighters of all time. But before we see what the #1 ranked fighter of all time is, let's quickly review the others on the list. Beginning the list in 10th place, an aircraft with a lot to prove, the F-22 Raptor. Hovering in 9th, Britain's quirky but deadly Harrier. In 8th, the granddaddy of them all, the Sopwith Camel. Edging ahead in 7th place, the world's first jet fighter, the fearsome Me-262. Next, the Spitfire, the most beautiful fighter of them all. Tied in 4th, two iconic jets that fought bitter battles at the height of the Cold War, the MiG-15 and the F-86 Sabre. In 3rd place, a surprise, the fantastic F-4 Phantom. And in 2nd, the F-15 Eagle. Big and bruising, it couldn't muscle in on the top spot. So, to the Top Gun. To the aircraft that our Matrix has ranked the #1 fighter of all time. A fighter that proves the rule that if it looks right, it is right. This is it, the best of the best.
The P-51D Mustang. Manufacturer, North American Aviation. Power plant, one 1600 horsepower Packard-built Merlin 61 piston engine. Maximum speed, 437 miles per hour. Armament, 6 wing-mounted 50 caliber machine guns.
There have been many famous contenders for the coveted title of best fighter aircraft of all time. But none could match the knockout punch delivered by the P-51 Mustang.
There's no doubt in my mind that the P-51D Mustang is the world's best ever fighter aircraft.
The cockpit is lovely. It's just feels like a fighter in the airplane. It has everything is right there. You have great visibility. If you really wanted to have a cool fighter cockpit, the Mustang encompasses that.
Its unique blend of superb handling, high performance, devastating firepower, and long-range endurance gives the P-51D its well-deserved place at the top of our top 10.
The Mustang is a nasty little shark. It's a killing machine.
One of a small number of aircraft to be conceived, developed, and put into wide-scale production within the 6 years of the war. The P-51 would eventually help establish air superiority over Nazi-occupied Europe. But in 1940, the Mustang was an aircraft with a poor reputation. Early models left much to be desired. At high altitudes, the P-51's Allison engine was woefully underpowered. and the fighter was no match for the Spitfire, the aircraft it had been designed to replace. But in 1942, the P-51's airframe was matched with Britain's now famous Merlin engine to give birth to the P-51D and to a legend.
If you were to put Spitfire up against the Mustang, the P-51, in a contest for which one comes up higher on the list, the Mustang would definitely earn itself a higher place because the Mustang solves so many of the problems of the Spitfire. It has got that extra bit of range. It has got that excellent supercharger that gives it that extra edge of high altitude performance. It has got that heavier armament.
This Merlin-powered P-51 would become famous for its bomber escort missions. In the summer of 1943, the Allies launched a combined bombing offensive against Nazi Germany. The American campaign had been based on the belief that the heavily armed Flying Fortress and Liberator bombers could defend themselves against attacking German fighters. But the daylight raids suffered heavy losses, and it soon became obvious that the bombers needed the protection of a fighter escort. The introduction of the Mustang would change the course of the war.
The two things that were brilliant were simply to get a good engine into what was a pretty decent airframe. The other brilliance of it, which is another thing fought tooth and nail by the Air Force, was the belly tank.
Fitted with external drop tanks, the Mustang's range was extended to almost 2,000 miles, making it the only Allied fighter capable of protecting the Allied bombers on long-range, deep-penetration raids.
It was the first fighter to go all the way to Berlin. That really was the crucial thing. It was fighting and destroying the enemy's center of gravity. It's the core of the fascist regime. You had to hit Berlin. You had to hit it day and night. And if you're going to do that in daylight, you had to be protected. And the only aircraft that could do that was the Mustang.
It did its mission better than any other airplane had done its mission before, particularly the long-range, high-altitude escorts. And at altitude, in that environment, it was a lethal killing machine. It did a great job.
The Mustang performed its job so well that after its introduction in 1944, casualty rates for bomber crews were reduced by 75%. In fact, American P-51s destroyed almost 5,000 enemy aircraft in Europe, making it the highest-scoring U.S. fighter in the theater.
It's an airplane that I just can't use enough superlatives about. And for me, the crucial factor is Reich Marshal Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe. In 1943, he came out of the German Air Ministry in Berlin, and there were fighter aircraft above. They were Mustangs. He recognized them, he turned to his aide, and he said, "The war's over. We've lost."
The Mustang scores brilliantly in all categories. Its relatively simple construction and methodical layout is short on innovation. But in every other category, the Mustang gets top points. So there it is, 10 aircraft that have shaped the world. But it's the P-51 Mustang that deserves its title as the best of the best.